I started in 1995 in the midst of a crisis. The mission had just lost almost $2 million. It looked like we were financially bankrupt. Longevity it's not perfect, but it gives you enough of a runway that I can tell my staff, this crisis will pass. We've gone through these kinds of things in the past and we'll get through it. And sometimes all we have to do is survive for a period of time to be able to thrive. Oftentimes our best opportunities are realized in the midst of that crisis. The first thing I did is launch what we called the Nehemiah Project to help rebuild the financial walls of Mission to the Americas, as we called ourselves back then. I traveled the country and did huddles across the country with all of our missionaries and shared with them the Nehemiah Project and asked them for their help financially to help rebuild the financial walls of Mission to the Americas. It was a tremendously bonding experience in those first months. It added something that was different. We're in a crisis and we've got someone who's not afraid to say this is how we can begin to respond. I think it created some very significant bridges for the future. We did get out of that. We had options as to what we would do to solve that financial crisis, and we could have put it on the backs of our missionaries and we didn't. So we assumed the full financial responsibility under the general fund and we did pay it off. It was unfortunate what happened, but it wasn't a bad way to begin. We moved from Wheaton, Illinois to 5 Points in Denver a week before 9/11. And so totally new staff, and then 9/11 hits. One of the first things we did, we had a significant New York City team. We scheduled a vision trip to New York City right after 9/11. I called up a bunch of pastors and said, hey, we've all been impacted by 9/11. What you may not know is we have a number of missionaries that are serving in the city in that context. We're going to sponsor this trip. We did that in November after 9/11 and met a couple of our missionaries that are still with us today that were just appointed earlier in that year. What we tried to do with that is, okay, it's a crisis, but it's also an opportunity to highlight the fact that we need ministry in this city right in the shadow of what happened. I'm more convinced than ever before that teams are what will either make or break your leadership. In the early 2000s, there was a lot of discussion back and forth between ourselves and our sister mission that covered the rest of the world. They increasingly wanted to do ministry in North America. And we at the same time were doing immigrant ministry and refugee ministry in the US. And some of those ministries, two in particular, one Cambodian ministry, we had a couple that came through the killing fields in Cambodia, immigrated to the US doing Cambodian ministry in Seattle. They wanted to bridge back to their birth country to do ministry. And we said, last we looked, Cambodia is not in North America. So we tried to give it away to our sister mission. They were a little uncomfortable with it because the leadership was indigenous, Cambodian. We had at the same time on the other coast in Washington, D.C. and Boston, we had Liberian refugees who had come to the U.S. from West Africa and during the Civil War, and we appointed them as full missionaries, and they were doing Liberian African ministry in Washington, D.C. and Boston, and they wanted to bridge back and send missionaries to their birth country. And so we came up with this concept called From There to Here and Back. So they're born internationally in Africa or Asia, they come here as immigrants or refugees, and then they want to go back. At the same time, we're having this dialogue with our sister mission, and it became a conclusion that we'd do a no boundaries thing. So we began ministry in both Africa and in Asia. So here we're Mission to the Americas, and we've got ministry in Africa and Asia. So for a while, we said we'll be Mission to the Americas and beyond. And it didn't last very long. We worked with a communications firm, and they said, "Yeah, you don't want to do that. Let's come up with a better name." And Missions Door was the result of the fact that we had already left the Americas, we had already left North America. So now we have ministry in South America, which we didn't before, Europe, Asia, and Africa. Not as concentrated as we have in North America, but we have ministry in all those continents. We did have programs like New Churches Now, the 3-year program, and most of that was in connection with state and regional associations, and we were in strong partnership with them, and we saw God bless that. Well over 100 churches were started in a 20-year period or so. The key thing we learned increasingly was the church planter, if the church planter was rooted in the soil, we tried to do some church planting in the South, and we're failures. Then we found people from the South, and they went to do it, and they succeeded. We began to do that outside the country with remarkable results, and began to get into this church multiplication like we had never seen before, because we were getting church planters that were rooted in the soil. In the last 20 years, we've seen our international missionary force completely transformed from primarily cross-cultural Americans to now primarily indigenous church planters from Latin America. And the results are just incredible. I think the challenge is, what can we take from what we've learned and the mistakes we've made, as well as some of the successes, and apply that in new situations and continue to keep that going in a multiplying way.